There's one skill that most English courses never teach, and that is how to sound warm and thoughtful in real life conversations. So today I'm going to share 10 British English phrases that will help you to connect, show empathy, and to sound a bit more like yourself when you speak English. So if you want to know how to make somebody feel seen and heard, how to disagree without causing offence, or how to say something difficult with care. In other words, how to sound like a thoughtful, emotionally intelligent human being in English, well, you're in the right place. I'm Jo, and this is Learn English with Jo, where we look at British English through a slightly different lens. Less grammar rules, but more real human communication. In today's video, I'm sharing 10 British English phrases to help you sound a bit more emotionally intelligent. These are the kind of phrases that native speakers often use instinctively without even thinking about it. But once you start using them, people will notice. Not necessarily consciously, they might just feel more at ease with you. And for me, that's what good communication is all about. If you'd like to download the notes and the transcript of this video, then I'll put a link in the description below to my Substack. Substack subscribers have access to all sorts of materials related to my channel. Okay, so let's have a look at these phrases. I've grouped them loosely into 4 areas: showing empathy, softening what you say, creating connection, and sounding reflective rather than reactive. Now, you don't need to memorize them all today. Just notice which ones feel closest to who you are and start there. Choose 1 or 2 that you like the sound of and then practice using them in a real life conversation. Phrase 1 is "that sounds really hard," and this is a great one for showing empathy. It's really simple, but I think it's one of the most powerful things that you can say to somebody. That sounds really hard. When somebody shares something difficult, often people's instinct is to say, I'm sorry to hear that. And that's fine. It's kind, but it's also a little bit passive. It puts the focus on your reaction rather than on the other person and what they're going through. That sounds really hard does something a bit different. It reflects back what the person has said. It tells them, I heard you. I'm not rushing to fix this or to move on or to change the topic. I'm just acknowledging what you said and recognising that it's difficult. You might say something like, you've been dealing with all that on your own. That sounds really hard. Or simply if a friend tells you that they've had a really tough week at work, you could reply with something like, oh, that sounds really hard. How are you coping with it all? It's small, but it works. Let's move on to number 2. And again, this is all about showing empathy. And it's, I can imagine how you feel. Now, it's worth paying attention to this one because there's a similar expression, which is, I know how you feel. And it sounds similar, but it's actually quite different. I know how you feel can sound slightly dismissive, even when it's meant kindly, because it shifts the conversation towards your experience and moves it away from theirs. It can feel like you're closing them down a bit rather than giving them space to open up. I can imagine how you feel, on the other hand, is softer. And in a way, it's more honest because we can never truly know how somebody else feels, but we can imagine. And saying so shows empathy without claiming more than you can give. So instead of saying, I know how you feel, I've been there too, you might say, I can imagine how you feel. That must be exhausting. That must be really hard. It's a small shift, but emotionally, it's quite a significant one. Phrase 3, again, is about empathy. It makes sense that you feel that way. This one is particularly good in situations where someone is feeling something that they feel they shouldn't be feeling. Maybe they're feeling guilt, anxiety, or sadness about something that they've labelled as silly or irrational. It makes sense you feel that way is a really validating phrase, and it doesn't judge. It doesn't problem solve. It just says to the other person, your feelings are reasonable. You're not overreacting. You're not being dramatic. It makes sense that you feel that way. Let's have a look at an example. After everything you've been through, it completely makes sense that you feel that way. Or in a slightly lighter context, you've got a big presentation tomorrow. It makes sense that you feel a bit nervous. In English, validation is an underrated communication skill. And this phrase is a really good one for offering it. Phrase 4 is good for disagreeing softly. I take your point, but... Now we're moving into the art of disagreeing well, which is something that the British are quite good at. A lot of Brits hate disagreement or potential conflict. So you'll probably hear this one quite a lot if you're working with British people. It's a good way of pushing back on something, but without dismissing what the other person has said. You're acknowledging their argument before you go on to offer your own. And the acknowledgement is really important here because it shows that you actually listened. Compare something like, no, I don't think that's right, which can frankly sound a bit blunt, with, I take your point, but I think there might be another way of looking at it. The second version keeps the conversation open. It's not aggressive, and it's confident without being combative. And this is a phrase where British English really shows its character. There's this instinct to soften, to cushion, and to make space for the other person even when you disagree. Phrase number 5 is I might be wrong, but... And this is another one for softening what you say. It's similar in spirit to the last one. But this time you're hedging your opinion rather than responding to somebody else's. Hedging in conversation is the use of cautious, soft language to make statements feel less direct or forceful. And we use hedging quite a lot in British English. I might be wrong, but... And using an expression like this doesn't show weakness. It rather shows intelligence. It shows self-awareness. It says, I have a view, but I'm open to being corrected. Let's look at an example. I might be wrong, but I get the feeling that she's not entirely happy with the result. Or I might be wrong about this. It's just the impression I get. A lot of learners that I speak to feel like they need to state things very directly and confidently. And yes, of course, confidence matters. But there's a kind of confidence that comes from being willing to be uncertain. And in British English conversation, that's more impressive than false certainty, which can come across as arrogance. Phrase 6 is another softener. It's not really my place to say, but... This phrase is useful for when you want to offer an observation or a gentle challenge, but first you want to acknowledge that you might be stepping into sensitive territory. It's not really my place to say, but I think it might be a good idea to talk to somebody about this. Or, it's not really my place to say, but you seem a bit off today. Is everything okay? This phrase is showing respect for boundaries while simultaneously opening a door. It's saying, I'm not assuming that I have the right to say this, but I care enough to say it anyway. It's really quite an emotionally intelligent move because it puts the other person in control of whether they decide to engage with you and what you've said. Phrase number 7 is a good one for creating connection. How are you finding it all? It's simple, but it's one of my favourites. How are you finding it all? Compare it to how are you, which in British English is more of a greeting rather than a genuine question. Most people just say, I'm fine, without thinking. How are you finding it all is different. It's open and it's specific to a situation. It implies, I know things have been a lot just lately, and I'm asking you properly how you're feeling about it, how you're coping with everything. How are you finding it all? You might say this to a colleague who's been under a lot of pressure. How are you finding it all with everything going on at the moment? Or maybe with a friend who's going through a big life change. How are you finding it all? It's been quite a year. It's a small phrase that makes people feel genuinely seen and invites conversation. Phrase 8 is also about creating connection, and it's no rush at all. This phrase is tiny, and yet it carries a lot of warmth. When you say no rush at all to somebody, you're giving them permission to take their time. You're removing pressure. So in an email, after asking somebody for something, you could add at the end, whenever you get the chance, no rush at all. Or if you're in a conversation with somebody and you ask them a question and they're taking some time to respond, you could say, no rush at all, have a think about it. It's a generous phrase. And in a world and a workplace where things can be pretty fast-paced, that generosity is often noticed by other people. They appreciate it. Phrase number 9 is another one for creating connection. That's a really fair point. And this is a good way to acknowledge something without going over the top. That's a really fair point. It's different from responding with something like, you're absolutely right, or yes, exactly, which can sound a bit hollow if you overuse them. That's a really fair point, is more considered. It says, I've actually thought about what you said, and I think you're right. You might use it when somebody raises something that you hadn't considered. That's a really fair point. I hadn't thought of it from that angle. Or when somebody challenges you gently. That's a really fair point. I think I need to reconsider this. It's a phrase that builds trust in conversation because it shows that you're genuinely listening rather than just waiting to take your turn to speak. So phrase 10, our last phrase today, is a good one for sounding reflective rather than reactive. And it's, I've been thinking about what you said. This is one of my absolute favourites. I've been thinking about what you said. This phrase does something remarkable. It tells the other person that they've said something that stayed with you. That after the conversation ended, you kept on returning to what they said. And what they said mattered enough that their words didn't just disappear. I've been thinking about what you said last week, about needing a bit more time. I think you're right. Or simply saying something like, I've been thinking about what you said and I want to come back to it. In a world of very fast conversations and short attention spans, this phrase is almost an act of care. And I think that's a lovely place to end today. Because ultimately, what all these 10 phrases have in common is that they put the other person first. They slow things down. They create space. And that, in any language at all, is what good communication looks like. And I think that's something that can get a little lost in traditional language learning. This idea that communication is not just about passing on information accurately. It's also about connection. It's about how the other person felt after they spoke with you. If this is the kind of English that you'd like to work on, not just the technical side, but the human side, then please subscribe, because this is very much what I talk about here. I've also got a Substack, which I mentioned before, and I'll link below. And on the Substack, I go a bit deeper into language, communication, and all the things that sit around language learning. And there's a community aspect there as well. You can talk to me on Substack. So if that's something you're interested in, do check it out. I'd love to talk to you over there. And if you'd like to practice language like this in real conversations, in a calm, relaxed personal space, then I also offer one-to-one conversation sessions. Again, all the details are in the description below. Thank you so much for being here. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.